Debbie from Lime Doodle Design, and thank you for joining me for Doodling with Debbie. Today I want to look at some new to me watercolour supplies. Watercolouring has turned into a long-term passion, and over time I've honed in on the products that I love. However, I don't want to get stuck in a rut, and so for this video I'm taking a look at a 5x7 block of Fabriano Artistico Extra White Cold Press Watercolour card and the watercolour markers from Karin. Starting with the watercolour card, this is a gummed 5x7 block of the Fabriano cold press paper with a 140 pound weight. One corner of the block is left without gum so that you can remove it from the block, and I'll be showing you how I do that later in the video, as well as chat about what I think about this card. Next is the Karin Brushmarker Pro set. The packaging of this set needs a mention as it is so nice to look at and well designed. These particular markers need to be kept upright, and so the packaging caters for that with a cardboard insert with holes for each marker to keep them supported upright. There are various sets of these markers you can buy. I don't tend to be a whole set person, but I did opt for the 60 marker set as I felt I wanted to give these a try, and the range of colours in this set suited me. The brush markers consist of a body with a 2.4ml of liquid ink in each, a cap indicating the colour, and a flexible nylon brush tip. Regarding design, if I had any quibbles, it is the labelling of the pens. I'd prefer if the colour information was printed on the cap rather than a label, which I'm sure over time will get worn. I use the swatch tag set from Waffle to swatch all my watercolour media. I have cut the stamp into two parts. The top part of the stamp I stamp on a 2x2 piece of watercolour card in VersaFine ONYX black ink. I stamp the rest of the image with details for pigment colours, granulation, light fastness, etc. on the back. I then paint with the media, and when dry place in Simple Stories 2x2 stamp pockets. I swatched out all of the 60 brush markers, and I find these references invaluable when choosing colours. I didn't end up using these, but I wanted to show you anyway. These are the DECOBRUSH markers from Karin. They are 10 permanent metallic markers set in a lovely tin. Again, the packaging has taken the storage of the markers into consideration, as these markers need to be stored flat. The design of the markers is the same as the watercolour ones, except these have a ball bearing inside to shake up and mix the ink before using. Again, I swatched these out, and I'm struggling on video to show the shine of these metallics, but in real life you get a lovely metallic colour which not only works on white card but also on coloured card too. I cut black and craft to fit behind my main swatch and tested the colours on these two, and you start to see a better indication of the potential of these markers and their lovely metallic sparkle. I'm excited to try these markers, so let's crack on and I'll chat more about them as I colour. Today I'm using this cute COTTONTAIL wishes set from Simon Says Stamp, which was released as part of their Easter limited edition kit. The kit sold out really quickly, but the stamp set is available separately. I was particularly taken with a cute bunny in the basket, so using my swatches I picked out a few markers to use. These were the starting point, but I ended up pulling more colours as I went along. So initially I had the 3 warm greys for the bunny, skin colour for the inside of the ears, cheeks, etc. Lipstick red for the bows on the basket, and then I had, I think it was rosewood, sandstone and cinnamon for the basket itself, and then picked out lime green and olive black for greenery, and cool aqua and turquoise, which I planned to start the Easter eggs off with. The gummed edges of the Fabriano block means that you can paint directly to the paper without having to tape it down to prevent it warping. However, as I wanted to stamp on this card in a misty, I took the top piece of card off with a palette knife from Ranger. I slid the palette knife under the corner without gum and gently eased the paper away from the rest of the block. This is a 5x7 piece, but I knew I would need a smaller piece than this, so I cut it down to be 5x3.5, giving me 2 pieces. I took one and placed it in the misty and stamped with antique linen distress ink. I do like the look of no-line watercolouring, and this ink is great for that as it is light in colour and water soluble, so it blends in as you paint. However, I do like to have a very light application, and so I use an old cloth to dab off some of the ink. I like to have the barest of outlines to colour, just enough for me to see what I'm doing, but not so much that the ink will be visible afterwards. If need be, I stamp again to get a more defined impression. I also stamped a couple of tulips beside the basket arrangement, but didn't want the bow on that side of the basket to become too confused with blooms, and so I rubbed off the ink on that side before stamping. However, you'll see that I forgot to soften the ink on the tulips I did stamp, and so the ink is more defined on these and does show up more in the final image. So my advice is light stamping to get that no-line look. Either stamp off on scratch paper or use an old cloth to remove some of the ink. My next tip when going for the no-line look is to define the edges of the images with darker colours. And so I'm starting here with the darkest of my warm grey markers. I've applied a line of colour along the side of the bunny's face, and then I have a damp watercolour brush to pull the colour out and soften the line. It is good to have some dark defined areas, but also some highlight areas too. So I try to get a good balance of dark areas and also areas which fade out to almost nothing. You'll see as I colour that I hit the tips of the ears with some depth of colour, but then fade it out over other areas of the ears. The same with the bow, deep colours near the basket and then fade it out to the lightest of colours as the tails of the bow blow in the wind. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Firstly, you can see that now I have sped up the video, and that is so that I can include as much of the colouring as possible. But just so you know, this image did take me, I'm thinking, over an hour to colour. However, I am a slow crafter that likes to take my time. I tend to start with lighter colours and then build up depth over time until I'm happy. It is my indecisive nature, I think. I am reluctant to hit deep, dark colours straight away, but possibly end up there in the end anyway. So let's chat about the paper and pens. The Fabriano watercolour card did a lovely job. It is described as extra white, and it is a shade lighter than my usual Arches card. However, there isn't a huge difference in colour. I think if you want decent quality watercolour card, then the majority are creamy in colour. And I've learned to accept that. Once you've painted your project, then to be honest, you aren't really looking at whether the background is white enough. So would I use this card again? Definitely. I really like that the card is on a block, which makes it particularly useful for travelling. I took this block away with me recently, and it was great to paint on the card, knowing that I didn't have to fuss with taking tape and board with me. It also behaved as I hoped a quality watercolour card would. Would I reach for over my usual Arches card? I think I'd be happy reaching for either, to be honest. I don't think one over the other has my preference. So moving on to the pens, and I had such fun with these pens. Now you see me colouring with them for a little while. You can see that I use them both to add colour to dry card and then blend out with a damp brush, and also in a wet on wet technique way of adding water to an area first and then touching the tip of the pen to the wet area and letting the colour spread through the water. Let me say that the ink in these pens is intense. You only need the tiniest amount of ink to get full-on vibrant colour. I was particularly impressed with the nib of the pen too, as it allowed for drawing fine lines of colour that could then be blended out. However, you don't have to blend the colour out. In places I used the ink as it was to draw in fine lines, such as the narrow areas of the bow loops. Those I did mainly just by drawing in with the ink, and later on when I coloured the tulips, a simple line of colour for the stems was all that was needed. So what do I think about these pens? As mentioned, I think the fine nib has to be right up there, along with the intensity of colour in the pens. Although each pen has only 2.4 ml of ink, I can see that lasting a very long time, as you only need the smallest amount when painting. The convenience of having colour at your fingertips too is very appealing. Just grab a pen and go. The pens are perhaps also more attractive to those that are nervous of watercolour pans and tubes, and I truly hope supplies like these make watercolouring more accessible to everyone. This video is my first look at these pens. Having swatched them out, this is the first time I've used them, and I'm very impressed. However, I am far from being an expert with them, and seeing the information leaflet that comes in the box, I realise I have lots of fun ahead of me trying different techniques with these pens. You can touch the pens tip to tip, and in doing so transfer ink from one to another. Then you colour with that pen, the colour will transition from one to another. There are also blender pens with these markers. The set I bought has 3 blender pens, and I'm excited to try these pens and see how they compare to blending out with water. You can also do the tip-to-tip technique with a blender pen too. In addition, you can mix and blend the colours, and I think this is possibly the next thing I'm going to try with these markers. If I'm honest, the markers are very vibrant, which is perhaps not my usual colour palette. It suited this cute Easter bunny image perfectly, but for some of my other projects I would look to mix the colours in order to tone them down. However, I don't count this as a negative. In any watercolour media, I prefer things to be overly concentrated or more vibrant because you can always dilute or tone things down. However, it is very hard to go the other way. The brush tip of the pens is proving particularly useful as I start to add detail to the basket. Just a few lines here and there in line with the original image and gently blended out. While I was colouring, my neighbour's dog I was looking after wandered up on my knee for a minute, so say hi to Wellington, otherwise known as Welly, which is a big name for such a cute wee pup. Okay, back to the colouring, and I'm using the concentrated colour that comes out of that fine nib to add more and more depth and detail. I'm moving around the image, adding an extra deep shadow here, an extra layer there, slowly building up the colour and defining the shapes from one another. Speaking of which, it is always a good idea to work on one area at a time. These pens are watercolour after all, and if you paint one area next to another, the ink will blend between the 2 wet areas. I'm using a bit of artistic license around the grassy area. The original tulip image had a leaf sprouting out to the right, but I didn't want that near the bow. However, the area was looking a bit blank, and so I used the pens to indicate leaf-like shapes and then blended and softened with a wet brush. I used a jar of water and a paintbrush throughout this painting as that's what I'm most used to, but a water brush would be a good option for this style of colouring too. As I was painting, I was thinking of Kathy Rakusen's 30-day colouring challenge, which is ongoing this month of March 2020. And I was thinking of the way Kathy often adds a different colour over her first layers. So I added a little purple to the blue eggs and some red to the peach, tulip and egg. Also thinking of the colouring challenge and Kathy's tips and tricks, I paid particular attention to those nooks and crannies, making sure to hit those darker colours. With this in mind, once I'd finished painting, I pulled out my Faber-Castell POLYCHROMOS and sharpened the pencils to a nice point before adding a few more details. I'd saved the eyes and whiskers of the bunny to last, knowing that these would work well with the pencils, and then I carried on adding in a little more shading and some details to the basket weave. Finally, as far as the colouring was concerned, I added highlight details with a white gel pen, polka dots to the Easter eggs, and a few hints of light in other areas. I cut and scored a card base from Neenah 100-pound weight, which makes for a sturdy card base. I then added a foam adhesive to the back of the watercolour piece, which I trimmed slightly to fit the base. I accented the watercolour with a couple of Craft Consortium Farm Meadow adhesive pearls and some glossy eggshell pearls from Little Things from Lucy's Cards, which I kept in place with Gina K Connect glue. For the sentiment, I picked a simple greeting from the COTTONTAIL Wishes stamp set and stamped it in Sam Says Stamp clear embossing ink on black card before sprinkling with Sam Says Stamp white embossing powder and heat setting. I trimmed the piece to a skinny banner and added foam adhesive to the back before using a T-square ruler to keep it in place. And that completes this simple watercolour card, taking a first look at Karin Brushmarker's Pro Set and Fabriano Artistico Extra White Cold Press watercolour card. On the Sam Says Stamp blog you'll find a coordinating blog post as well as details of the supplies I've used today. If you want to find me, I blog over at limedutydesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.